I want to welcome everyone today joining us. Today we have a wonderful partner of ours, Sherwin-Williams, who is a partner of International Market Centers at Las Vegas Market, High Point Market, and Atlanta Market. And today we have the premiere of Mode, Colormix 2022. And presenting it will be Sue Wadden, the color director for Sherwin-Williams. This is CEU approved. And for those tuning in, that information will be emailed out to you following the presentation. If you're viewing this on Facebook or on YouTube, you can email me at kporter@imcenters.com and I'll send it to you. We also have our Las Vegas market, which is starting this weekend, this Sunday, live in person on our campus in Las Vegas. And we welcome you to join us on site if you can. And if you can't, then we still welcome you to visit us on our website at lasvegasmarket.com. It's going to be a wonderful presentation. And at this time, Sue, take it away.
Great. Hello, everybody, and thank you so much for joining us. This is our very first presentation of our annual Colormix Forecast. This is Colormix Forecast 2022. It's hot off the presses, so I'm excited to share it with you. I just wanted to make a couple of small notes. Lori Clark is our designer account executive that supports Las Vegas and sort of the Southwest, and she is going to monitor the chat session. If you have questions, just feel free to jot them down there, and then hopefully we'll leave a couple minutes at the end of the presentation to go over any questions that you might have. So again, thank you and welcome. This is our Colormix Forecast for 2022. Mode is the title of the forecast. My name is Sue Wadden. Again, I'm the Director of Color Marketing. So I represent sort of the mind behind this color forecast, although there's so many contributors to this process. It's real labor of love for us, and we're proud of the presentation this season. We think it came together really well. So here is a video, which is not playing the way it should right now. This is sort of our introduction slide. This is our forecast vision. It's about a 1-minute slide, and I'm sorry, are you guys hearing audio?
No, I'm not hearing any audio.
Well, we'll try to fix that. If nothing else, you can just enjoy the presentation. Okay, hold on. Here's me getting a little rough start. Okay, here we go. Here's our copyright slide. Again, this is a copyrighted presentation. So not for republishing other than with approved sources. And okay, here we go. So here's our intro slide to Mode. The methods and means of architectural design have long reflected modern trends in culture and society. And now in 2022, as we approach 2022, we realize that nothing is permanent and everything is changing moment to moment, I feel like. So as we move out of 2021 and sort of the stillness, and we'll say stillness because of the pandemic and our sort of quarantine phase, we're going to sort of explore the unfamiliar. Design is changing as we know it. And in many ways, we're just appreciating each change, right, for what it is and trying to find silver linings. And design is a really big part of that because as designers, we're going to be challenged with sort of revising and reshaping how we live our lives. So Mode sort of takes all of that into consideration and kind of talks about it. This 2022 color report is going to reveal stories of definitely natural colors, of warmth, and the idea of nostalgia and sort of the fundamental mode of well-being and living well. So here's the central kind of tenet of the forecast. This is our collection palette. We've got 40 curated hues, and from these 40 central colors, these sort of key color directions, we've curated 4 individual stories. And for those that are familiar with the Colormix Forecast, we do that every year because it's just nice to tell the color stories under this sort of narrative umbrella. But again, the emphasis here are on these trend colors. So you can kind of see we've got dark saturated hues, some sort of lighter chromatic colors. Not a lot of gray here, right? We've been talking about how neutrals are shifting away from the gray experience, which most designers are really excited about. And then there's some brighter bold hues and definitely like watery green organic hues. So we'll talk in each of the color stories about that and sort of share the insights behind that. One of the definite things that we've seen is a hue shift that's been building over really the last several seasons, but it's a continuation of this maximalism that really emerged in 2019 out of Milan. And through 2020 and then into the pandemic, we've seen creative expression really help people sort of navigate the close quarters of quarantine and sort of explore the power of color. So we're really going to see that in all facets of this forecast. Here are the 4 palettes: Method, Opus, Dreamland, and Ephemera. Our 2022 forecast team did endless research. While we couldn't be in person, we read reports and what was coming out of each sort of part of the world to talk about these synthesized trends, and they really did influence the color groupings. So we'll talk about central themes like nature's inspiration, balancing well-being, or how nostalgia and industrial glam are influencing modernism. I've got a large section on materiality, which is sort of the material reports. We'll talk about products and surfaces that validate the rise of these key colors. And then finally, we'll talk about some of the influences from entertainment, culture, art, design, science, to give a comprehensive viewpoint on color and trends as we move out of the uncertainty of 2021 into the optimism of 2022. So our next slide is the full 60-second video, which I had talked about before, but this will play now. So our first color story is Method. Like a virtual reset, COVID-19 has helped us clarify our outlook, hopefully. We seek to live well, be well, and stay balanced as we kind of disengage from the solitude of last year and get back to the simple joys of everyday life. In 2020, we really heavily relied on the power of nature to help kind of create physical and emotional sanctuaries. Well, we're going to continue that approach, but now we'll look to the natural world to guide our approach to the future of design with a new sense of perspective, and really sustainability. So in Method, we'll explore nature's influences and how these concepts are revealed in a collection of organic neutrals and tonal luxury. And here is a short little palette video to get you inspired by Method. Love this slide. This palette tells a really sophisticated story of sort of soft luxury, which really idealizes the hues of nature. It's about comfort and stability and how these grounded neutrals fuse with this really punchy, vibrant gold and yellow green for a color story that's filled with warmth and security. Again, the role of neutral has been evolving from gray to a warm expression. And we've seen that over the last couple seasons. And we'll continue to see that momentum in 2022 for a return to really humble and natural materials, rounded shapes, and understated texture. Organic, and the idea of organic and naturally derived colors reflect craft, community, sustainability, and nature. This next section, which we'll have consistent with each of the 4 palettes, is the influences. Trends, by their definition, they have a long trajectory. The impact they make can endure well past their lifespan as trend, as once was, now becomes integrated into the norm. So drivers and influences are the building blocks of these trends and guide us in formulating and outlining the attitudes, perceptions, visions, how we perceive these trends. So whether it's a social, cultural, technological, or creative movement, all of these play a fundamental role in the color directions. So in this influences section, we're going to talk about Art Deco, intention, modern organic, and postmodernism. One of the main macro influences that we're seeing is the return of the idea of nostalgia and retro style. Really, each of the collections in 2022 is influenced by this idea of vintage, or what was once, what came before, I guess. So in Method, we'll explore the idea of new deco and postmodern interpretations. And if you look back, Art Deco or New Deco was the predominant decorative art style of the 1920s and 30s. It was characterized by boldly and delineated geometric shapes, strong colors, and used most notably in household objects and in architecture. But now we're seeing it sort of reinterpreted and relaunched in what we call New Deco, or sort of vintage Bauhaus interpretations. They're either styled though in a contemporary setting or updated with new colorways and finishes. We're showing it here with these obviously natural colors. These new retro pieces, they're sort of minimalist in style. They have a softer feel. There's lots of curves in this trend report, sort of softly proportioned. And we kind of parlay that into the idea of wellness and sort of how that softness fits in with the idea of living well. And there's a lot of curvy and retro shapes. So again, it's a looking back at Art Deco to inspire what is kind of a new expression of the style. So here's the idea of intention. Extended time spent at home has led to the rise in the need for self-care and intentional moments throughout the day. The relationship between well-being and our environment is being reevaluated as people take a more holistic and restorative approach to health, for sure. Environments that are more calming and supportive are mainstreaming, both in the design community and really as a consumer focus. So designers and architects are exploring new methods to promote healing and therapeutic spaces within the home and honestly in the commercial environment. Our third influence is organic modern. Organic modern styles trace back to the turn of the 20th century when Frank Lloyd Wright put forward the concept of organic building. In the 1930s, Alvar Aalto became one of the forerunners of the international style and influenced modern designers like Charles Eames as well. So this counterculture reaction to the rampant consumerism of that period and its impact on the planet gave rise to a sustainability movement and what we term like the green movement, which has now found its way into the mainstream as organic modern design. While organic modern is a nod to Scandinavian design and minimalism, it also borrows from mid-century modern and bohemian styles, sort of this fusion to create spaces that are inviting, they're warm, they're natural, and they're kind of effortlessly sophisticated. So while still incorporating minimalism and functionality, the organic modern aesthetic ultimately seeks to harmonize elements of nature into a modern lifestyle. And our fourth influence is postmodernism. So the fourth influence takes us back in time again. And here we'll talk about what we define as kind of the 1980s quintessential aesthetic. Think Memphis style or Frank Gehry. Was born out of the reaction to the austerity, formality, and rigidity of the modernist styles of the 60s and into the 70s. We often use the term postmodern to describe any style that seems a little avant-garde. So it can be funny, humorous, whimsical, unexpected. But here, as opposed to what we saw in the 80s, the expression is a little more muted. So we're taking our color cues from the natural environment, not quite as bold and poppy as they were in the 80s, of course. And again, we'll see the sculptural elements, the rounded curvy shapes, but again, it's tied to this natural muted palette that creates a little bit more casualness and kind of expressive warmth. Our next section is our materiality report. We know designers and architects are constantly evaluating materials, and we know this because the physical properties of building materials and finishes are so important. We know that they have intangible value as well, because we want to blaze a path towards a sustainable future, right? So now designers and architects are going to be looking to those materials that really have a sustainability footprint, a good carbon footprint, are going to be the kind of organic materials we want to bring into our interiors environment. So for each of the sections, we'll kind of talk about that, but this is the section and the exploration of materiality for method. Shape and volume, again, we'll go back to this idea of the cylinder, these rounded shapes and forms. They are plump sometimes. They continue, even though the materials that they're sort of covered with are softer and organic in texture and variation, we see this rounded shape continue to grow. Shapely comfort. Objects are fluted or corrugated for sort of sensual and round profiles. Again, the idea of this plumpness, this cushiness, comfort, quilted, the seating and undulated forms, they add kind of a rhythm to materials. For wood surface, consumers are exhausted sometimes with technology, so they seek to create a calming refuge in homes. And because of this, we've seen a shift to simpler, more organic home design that contributes to a sense of serenity and kind of this barely there finish and authentic wood that kind of like really plays up nature's imperfections. Inspired by Noguchi, if those can remember, Noguchi's biomorphic aesthetic was all about sculptural works inspiring contemporary interiors. So like paper cutouts, recalling mid-century style, organic lines interweave across wall treatments, furniture, and small accessories. You'll see these shapes in all sorts of products emerging into the marketplace. For metal, we have a couple slides on metal. Here we're showing balanced metallics. So again, this idea of warmer metals, whether they're champagne gold, tarnished gold, warmer sort of silvers and blacks, but they're fused with organic wooden and like organic materials like stone. So again, it's this balance of sort of smooth metallics and other finishes. And then more mixed metals here, we're showing a fusion in style. So fine either silver or gold finishes, add a subtle touch of light and contrast with rough raw materials or Bauhaus design. So again, it's that duality of light and dark, natural and sort of industrial. Texture and surface, tweedy, grainy, monochromatic. Really, this is a natural collection of colors and textiles. They suffuse design with tactility and softness, natural materials, sanded finish, organic shape, characterized surface. Tile, again, a continued surge of interest in handcrafted tactility, are inspiring surfaces and glazes for ceramics. We're kind of turning our attention to the untapped, unconventional, and abundantly available raw materials that are out there, you know, so not overly produced, naturally occurring, non-toxic industrial byproducts, again, with sustainability at the forefront of manufacturing. And then you're going to see a more and more natural vegetable dyes coloring our products, whether for commercial or residential interiors. Lots of products and manufacturers are looking at natural dye methods for color applications and exploring natural colors in like next generation pigments like bacterial color or vegetable dyes. And we are taking a lot of inspiration from processes that were done hundreds of years ago because they were so natural and organic in nature. And that sort of contributes to a warm and authentic patina. Our next section is our gallery slide. So this is a curation of products and interiors and exteriors that sort of work together to bring forth the method palette. All right, so that concludes the method collection. We'll move into our next palette, which is Opus. In 2019, we started tracking the energetic rise of maximalism. We had seen it as a reversal of all the Scandinavian design of the last decade. And we were looking to color and creative expression to inspire. In 2022, we'll see this trend evolve to become something a little darker, a little moodier, and sometimes a little industrial. And so it's sort of interesting to see the transition, and I would directly equate that to where the pandemic took us. So we were at one place pre-pandemic, and now there's been a color shift as we hopefully emerge out of where we've been over the last 18 months. We'll show a palette video on Opus next. So here's the palette. You can sort of see here deeper, dusky tones, unexpected accents. It's kind of a new kind of industrial classic. It's a little gilded and it's a little punk rock. So we'll talk about the influences that kind of pulled these hues together. From a color cue perspective, again, industrial maximalism combines with theatrical opulence for a movement that lives both luxurious and a little edgier. The duality implies a confidence and self-assurance in this idea of edgy self-expression. They're ready to express themselves, and we're kind of seeing it manifest in a little edgier way. Opus's influences are modern maximalism, glam industrial, theater, and the idea of moody eclectic. I love this influence, and the idea is dark academia. So cottagecore, goblincore, fairycore, dark academia. All these cores have emerged from the dream worlds and virtual communities that we really participated in during the global lockdown. And we saw that particularly in dark academia is this popular aesthetic that evolved around classic literature and sort of the pursuit of self-discovery and general passion for knowledge and learning. And you can sort of see this with younger populations as schools were shutting down. There was this interest in kind of like castle core and fairies and goblins and this sort of murky underbelly. I don't want to say like fairy Harry Potter, because it was a little darker and a little moodier from that expression. Glam industrial. I love the slide, the image in the slide, because it characterizes it perfectly. It's a little bit luxurious in the gold undertones, but almost sinister in the way that the lamps are created. So often remembered for materialism and consumerism, the early 1980s was also the decade that saw the rise of social awareness and punk rock narratives. And this exploration of kind of the gritty underside of urbanism and the balanced opulence of glam draws an interesting parallel in our current political state. It's kind of equivalent. It's being compared to the industrial days of New York and London in the 1980s. And in terms of interiors and architecture, there are references to brutalism, Italian futurism, and the aesthetic is really unapologetic. It's functional, honest, and dark. Theater. So the rise of vintage maximalism, along with all the other cores, is not a coincidence, really, considering we're emerging at the tail end of a decade defined by minimalism. The theater in design is a way of revolting against this sort of spare white wall existence that we lived through in the last decade. And, you know, this was the prevalence of wabi-sabi. It was the dominant expression of luxury. Hanging Edison bulbs, plain camel-colored sweaters, a cappuccino resting on a reclaimed wood side table. You know, that aesthetic was really a defining characteristic of the last decade. And so now it's normal and natural that we swing in a really dramatic arc in the other direction. And that's kind of where this idea of theater plays in as a strong influence. We want to know, you know, we want to show interiors that are lived in, that people actually inhabit and have their personality and sense of style. It's not this sort of antiseptic, minimalistic viewpoint. And so that's where this idea of theater comes in, as well as moody eclectic. So we draw a lot of inspiration from the fantastical, sort of the otherworldly. It's kind of wild. It's a little like luxurious garden and theme. It's deep and dense shades. We're seeing a Victorian aesthetic come into play here, kind of bizarre, a little exotic. So we all kind of combine that into this idea of the moody eclectic interior. From a material standpoint, we're going to go into the sort of products that defined this collection, but it's really much more angular than Method was. It sort of challenges our perspective on products. Materials can sometimes seem severe or very heavy and glazed, strong color, and aged patina. This is Blacklight. Surfaces play on light for mysterious, industrial, and elegant effects. So again, tone on tone, super dark. Again, this theater of the product and sort of application in interiors. Black shine, even, and black here encompasses many things. It can be brown black, blue black, green black, but it's mostly the juxtaposition of the highly lacquered to the matte finish, and that kind of duality as with what we call black on black shine. Antique patina, so we see this in all sorts of products, from metal and wood surface, which we'll talk about in a second, but particularly on metal. The idea of patina and the aging process on metal tells the story of Opus, really, and kind of the passing of time on products. For wood surface, texture is more prevalent than ever, with distressed rustic finishes, cerused materials, and geometric patterns leading the way. We see charred surfaces, and those have been, you know, kind of in trend reports over the last several years. The idea of blackened or charred or shishugiban, like these dark, like volcanic almost surfaces, and they are mainlining in products like furniture and wood surface, again, as this darker expression evolves in the maximalist themes. Again, sharp angles, so biomorphism is different here. It's much more contemporary vibe, sharper edge. It's like a paper cutout, but again, we see this in dark materials and sort of a sinister, edgier vibe. Again, here's the idea of tufting, but it looks a little darker, a little edgier, a little more unique in shape. But again, there is that softness. You could see a little bit of the idea of luxury here. Velvets, sort of crushed materials, kind of live in these richer colors. Surfaces appear synthetic. There can be heavy glazes. There can be carbon fiber, steel, concrete compositions, all fused together with this really gritty, earthy palette. Not earthy, just really gritty, monochromatic palette almost. For pattern, again, we see strong 1980s references to sort of brutalism and that kind of graffiti art and street art of the 80s urbanist movement. And it's kind of reimagined here. But again, definitely strong colors and really clear, gritty graphics. Animal skins, but unique animal skins. So bird feathers, pony hide, obviously synthetic. Again, kind of an edgier expression of animal skins. And I feel like animal skins really come in and out very quickly in trend reports, but here we see them in a kind of unique interpretation. And again, we go back to this castle core, or this idea of luxury finishes and tabletop, kind of celebrating the idea of the medieval castle. So heavily ornate, those goblets, that glassware, those are, you know, new to the marketplace, and they feel like a vintage goblet. So we're talking here about dinner at the castle and how they kind of feel like a maximalist banquet in medieval times. So we'll go into our gallery section next, and you can kind of see sort of a slideshow of some images for Opus. Okay, that concludes Opus. Our third palette is Dreamland. Well-being and living well continue to be top of mind for lifestyle design and interiors, for sure. We're moving past the tones of nature into something a little more efflorescent, intersecting between the digital and the natural, which is going to be a primary theme in future trend reports. So in Dreamland, we'll explore the fullness of living with the vernal sweetness of bud and bloom and discover the joy of life-giving energy at the start of a new season. Here's a video for Dreamland. This palette tells an ethereal story where you can set yourself adrift in a fantasy realm of pearlescent tones. There's new growth greens, lavish pinks and purples, and sort of a desaturated natural hue creates a soft and calming impression, and sort of greens set the tone for this kind of natural expression. From a color cue, this palette's super versatile, obviously for choices like residential interiors, but across commercial applications as well. These soothing and harmonizing colors are ideal for hospitality, healthcare institutions, where a sense of comfort is really desirable and appropriate. From an influences standpoint, we're going to talk about biomimicry, renewal, eco-style, and wellness. Influence 1, biomimicry. So biomimicry offers an interconnected understanding of how nature works and really ultimately where we fit into nature. It's a practice that learns from them and mimics the strategies used by species alive today. The goal is to create products and processes and policy sometimes that solve our greatest design challenges sustainably and with a solidarity with all life on Earth. We look to biophilic design pioneers like Dr. Stephen Keller, who stress the importance of a holistic approach to building natural elements into spaces, asserting shapes and materials that mimic nature and can have a positive impact on well-being. We have just seen it time and time again, where products that mimic natural materials harmonize with human beings and sort of mental health. And we're going to continue to be that be a strong influence on design, particularly coming out of the pandemic. Here we'll talk about renewal. So the security of shutting the door and knowing you're safe, calm, and quiet will continue to be important in 2022 as we emerge from the isolation, hopefully. Natural elements in nature provide soft security as the outside world might seem disconnected and exhausting. But what we saw really emerge is this exploration of digital space, whether we were stuck on Zoom calls all day or looking at Instagram. There is a whole community of designers that are emerging that design in this sort of digital space. And that's why the colors here are softly sort of about renewal and this like digital calmness, which is an interesting trend that's emerging. Eco-style, circularity, pragmatism, and recycling. Again, these are key themes and design directions and will continue to influence materiality moving forward. We want to reuse instead of exhaust finite resources. So we look to pre-existing materials and the sort of reinvention of those materials into new form. And the idea of biomaterials, it's a relatively young and dynamic research field, which is gaining traction with students now as an incredibly important field of study. So I think we'll continue to see product innovation come into the marketplace at an astonishing rate as we really realize the importance of designing sustainably. And then again, wellness. We all know this theme is central and important to human well-being, but the trauma of the pandemic and recession will see clients assessing their emotional, physical status with a new understanding of how the two are interlinked and how they can contribute to their overall health, wellness, and well-being. This wellness industry is huge. And I don't know, a recent figure, which I think I stated on the slide, it's like almost $1 trillion. So we'll continue to see products emerge with under this sort of wellness umbrella. From a materials standpoint, staying at home during the pandemic has turned many people's attention inwards. So there's more emphasis on textures and materials that focus on comfort. Here we see this opaline transparency. We've seen this surface talked about for a few seasons, but here it's a little playful and a little soft and a little rounded. Translucence, opalescence, ethereal surfaces shimmer and reflect like prisms, highlighting soft, sensual colors. We see textures from frosted glass, tinted plexiglass, milky plastics, and composite resins for a new take on transparency. Textiles and innovation, it's a great way of adding visual image interest and sort of coziness, and it can update looks easily and sustainably. So with this focus on sustainable materials, we'll see textiles continue to sort of reuse and recycle upcycled materials, vintage scraps, eclectic patchwork, storied embellishments. We'll see sort of this woven expression continue in this organic thread with these natural colors of the Dreamland palette. Geometric shapes, here again, we've got references to sort of this 80s modernism. So they're strongly graphic and colorful. For wood surface, I know we're not talking about minimalism, but here we'll talk about it a little bit more as the colors here are Scandinavian inspired and they're a little bit bleached with a little bit of gray, a touch of gray, but warmer blonde finishes are emerging as well and gaining popularity. So again, we're looking for a subtle sense of lightness in wood surface for Dreamland. Sanded molded finishes look through the filter of psychedelic lenses to reveal striations, streaks, and surreal textures in all sorts of surfaces and materials, from flooring to counter to product. Stratification. So this continues to be a natural inspiration as we look towards mineral deposits and nature to influence design. But here marbled effects are exaggerated. The veining is inspired by precious minerals, from resins to natural stones to gemstones, inspiring all sorts of services from textiles to products. Artificial mosses, lots of inspiration here, again, from the bacterial genome, inspired by mosses, microorganisms, mold, foam, grainy surfaces, micro bumps, textures, furry. You know, we see sort of this really organic kind of funky fungus vibe interpreted with this ethereal color palette. Comforting softness, again, here's this coziness in shapes, rounded forms in this ethereal color. Reframing plastics, as we strive towards a more circular economy, plastic waste is being rebranded as a responsible and valuable material. Can you imagine? So now we'll be looking to harvest plastic as a sustainable resource, which is amazing. And we'll move into the slideshow for Dreamland to show some products in action. All right, so that was Dreamland. And so we'll move into our fourth and final collection, which is titled Ephemera. Nostalgia is a subtle but powerful tool that delivers comfort and a sense of well-being in turbulent times. We often look back to look forward, and in 2022, we will certainly employ that tactic. We see a strong resurgence in heritage style, heirloom craft, and vintage curation. Each shade here is carefully chosen to evoke the fond remembrance of what once was and the unwavering optimism of what could someday be. From a color cue perspective, with the muted retro quality, the palette is designed to look back for inspiration of previous eras, and we look to the power of collective memory to suggest the comfort with the familiar. Vintage design is highly emotional because it belongs to the history of each of us. It evokes nostalgia in people of all ages. Vintage design is a constant influence. Collectively, the retro looks back to earlier eras based on specific style elements and brings them forward into modern interpretations. So we'll talk about influences from nostalgia, retrofuturism, meaning and memory, and optimism. With nostalgia, turning nostalgia to nostalgia is a common psychological response in times of crisis because it produces feelings of comfort. On the surface, it's easy to put a yearning for times gone by down to just pure nostalgia. However, there's more to it than that, particularly in design. It's also an appreciation for the innate charm of those bygone design styles. So their reemergence is attributed to strong design characteristics that have potential to work in any discipline, and not only brought about by the attachment of fond memories. Simply put, we look back to look forward. Retrofuturism is a movement in the creative arts showing the influence and depictions of the future produced in an earlier era. And we see this mainstreaming big time now in the entertainment business, from Marvel's studios, WandaVision and Loki and all the new streaming videos that are coming out are really employing retrofuturism. And it's characterized by a blend of old-fashioned and retro styles with future technology. And so it's going to be interesting to see how this idea of retrofuturism continues in entertainment and how it influences design moving forward. Meaning and memory, nostalgia therapy, or reminiscence therapy, as it's often referred to, is the practice of using nostalgic prompts, photographs, music, old video footage to sort of bring a sense of calm and clarity to those that are aging. And the idea is being now used in aging care facilities to bring a sense of comfort. So whether it's like a 50s inspired living room or a whole street setup with a, a soda shop, new and innovative memory care facilities are sort of employing this nostalgia tactic to help their residents feel a little calmer and a little happier. And optimism. Nostalgia is an important psychological resource that helps individuals cope with stresses. It's about building strong relationships, finding meaning in life, and being creative and inspired. So our fond memories of times gone by can help to maintain current feelings of self-worth and can contribute to a brighter outlook on the future. I can't tell you enough. I have a teenage daughter, and she talks to me all the time about how she wished she grew up in the 80s or in the 90s because she feels such a sense of safety and security there. And she was born in 2005. So again, this idea of nostalgia creates this, again, this optimistic vibe and a little bit of a sense of security. Materiality report, retro finish, shape and surface define this material report. Again, 1960s minimalism, smooth polished surfaces, dark woods, round compact shapes, really reminiscent of 1960s design. Burnt orange, a color spotlight on the ever-present burnt orange or terracotta will continue to be important in seasons, next season and in the future. The idea of the modular sofa, sort of the swanky 60s sofa, especially in times of quarantine, we all relied on our family rooms and places where we could all be together. And so now more than ever, this idea of the modular sofa in design is super important. For wood surface, nostalgic browns continue to grow in popularity, skewing away from the yellow, orange, and red undertones of yesterday towards a more modern, rich ebony and dark chocolate hues. These grounding finishes added understated luxury to the home. Ceramic surfaces, again, if you can see it tiled, we are seeing it happen. Kind of that idea of the DIY surface. So people are being really inspired by the 1950s and 60s coffee tables. And we're seeing this done in kitchen, in furniture, as kind of a new approach to 60s modernism. Again, speaking of color blocking, it's emblematic of the 60s. It's timeless. Iconic standards of design are remastered with a colorful, punchy palette. And again, it looks bright and cheerful. Arty folk, this is more in line with product development, but we see this expression of, sort of nostalgia in kids' toys, kind of mixing with natural materials. Geometrics, again, strong geometrics. We'll talk about the Memphis style on the next slide, from cubism to cubist-inspired rugs to asymmetrical sort of Tetris shelving. Furniture and materials play with strong, unusual combinations of geometrics. Again, the idea of the Memphis graphics, we know that movement was sort of invented as a decorative style, but here it's reemerging as a angular sort of grid pattern for walls and surface. And here's our gallery selection for Ephemera. right, so that concludes Ephemera and our forecast presentation. So I want to say thank you for joining. I'm going to jump out of the presentation and see if there's any questions. But please be sure to check the chat box. Lori has a link to, you can put your name and email address and information on a form, and we can send you the certification for the event, as well as our lookbook. We produce materials to send out this year, yay. So you can get a lookbook, a fan deck, and so be sure to fill that out. But I'm going to jump out. Well, thanks everybody so much. It was fun to present. I can't believe it's a whole new forecast this year. And yeah, look forward to hopefully seeing you soon. Thanks everybody.